They say Saturdays are made for peace and routine, but sometimes life has other plans for an old man like me. My name is Howard Bennett. I live in a quiet corner of Indianapolis, where the air on weekend mornings is usually filled with the hum of my old Hoover vacuum and the scent of fresh coffee from the kitchen. That morning was no different, at least, it started that way. I was just finishing up vacuuming the living room, circling around my wife Linda's favorite recliner, the same chair she picked out before cancer took her 2 winters back, when I heard the sound of a high-end car engine out front. Not the rumble of an old pickup or the gentle chug of my neighbor's sedan, but the sleek purr of a luxury electric car. Sure enough, through the window, I saw a gleaming blue Lucid Air slide into my driveway. That could only mean one thing: my son, Brian. And Brian never showed up early on a Saturday unless something was wrong. He barged in without knocking, just like he owned the place. "Dad, why are you doing your own chores? Don't you know you can just pay someone for this stuff?" His voice had that sharp impatience he'd started wearing ever since his app company hit it big. I clicked off the vacuum. The sudden silence felt heavier than his words. Brian stood there in jeans so new you could see the price tag in the way he moved, a fitted designer t-shirt, and sneakers that cost more than my monthly groceries. I took a moment, wrapping the cord, and studied his face, tired eyes, jaw set tight, no hint of the kid who used to laugh at my dumb dad jokes. "Keeping busy keeps me sharp," I told him, but he'd already flopped into my old reading chair, the one I'd spent years breaking in. He looked around the room like he was sizing up a property on Zillow. He picked up a battered paperback off the coffee table, glanced at the cover with a smirk, and tossed it down again. "You live like a retiree, Dad. You could be in Miami, golfing every day. Instead, you're stuck here in this place, doing chores." I shrugged, feeling the ache of 67 years in my shoulders. "I am a retiree. And this is my home." It stung more than it should have. Brian just laughed, dry and cold. "Yeah, and that's your problem." There was a time he joined me on these Saturday mornings, washed the car, raked leaves, asked me questions about life. Now my own house felt smaller with him in it. Every picture on the wall, a family barbecue, a birthday party, Linda in her garden, suddenly seemed faded under his judgment. "What brings you by so early?" I asked, keeping my voice even. Brian started pacing, eyes restless, the way he does when he's about to pitch investors. "This isn't early. This is a normal hour for adults who actually do things. Dad, just look at this place. You've stopped trying. You've checked out. Is this how you want to spend your last years?" He stopped in front of my trophy shelf, the one with a few old bowling league awards and a faded little league photo of him holding up a home run ball. "When was the last time you actually mattered to someone?" I could feel a slow heat building in my chest. "I worked 40 years at the factory. Put you through Northwestern. Paid for your first office, co-signed your car loan. Isn't that enough?" He spun, eyes hard. "You gave me the basics, Dad. But I had to claw my way up because you didn't know anyone, couldn't open any real doors. You never showed me what real success looks like." I gripped the vacuum like a lifeline. "You think I wanted an easy life? I gave everything so you could have more than I did. You've made it. I'm proud of you." He shook his head, dismissing me. "You settled. You never even tried to build something bigger. You're content just to fade away. That's not what a real man does." Those words hit harder than any punch. I stared at the son I'd raised, the boy I used to tuck in at night, and saw a stranger. The room felt colder. Finally, I set the vacuum down and looked him dead in the eye. "If you're so disappointed in me, there's the door, Brian. I won't listen to this in my own house." For a second, his mask slipped. Surprise, maybe regret, but then it was gone. He grabbed his jacket off the back of the chair, shot me one last look, half anger, half something else, and walked out, slamming the door behind him. The room echoed with silence, the kind that settles in after a storm. I sank into Linda's old chair, heart thudding, wondering how two people could drift so far apart while living under the same name. Outside, the Lucid pulled away, its taillights flashing like the closing credits on a bad movie. I watched until the street was quiet again. Then I looked around my living room, my books, my photos, the vacuum still standing, and tried to remember the last time I'd felt proud of the life I'd built. Tomorrow, I'd call my old friend Eddie. Maybe he'd help me make sense of it all. For now, I just let myself sit with the hurt, and the stubborn spark of pride that even Brian couldn't take from me. That night, sleep didn't come easy. I sat by the window in the dark, watching the neighborhood settle into the kind of peace I hadn't felt all day. Sometimes, when the world gets too noisy, an old man just needs the hush of midnight and the memory of simpler times. I kept replaying Brian's words, sharp, cold, unfair. But as much as they stung, they couldn't erase everything I'd done for him. Every job I'd taken, every overtime shift, every night I'd driven an old pickup home on empty streets, just to make sure there was food on the table and a future for my only boy. I stared at Linda's picture on the mantel, her gentle smile a reminder that some things, real things, last longer than money or success. The next morning, I called Eddie Sullivan. He's been my friend for 40 years, back when we both wore tool belts and thought the world was ours to build. Eddie's the kind of man who tells the truth, whether you want to hear it or not. He picked up on the third ring. "Howard! Haven't heard from you since last month. What's up?" "Eddie," I said, my voice rougher than I'd meant. "You ever feel like your own kid's a stranger?" There was a long pause. "You want coffee or whiskey for this talk?" he asked, half joking, half serious. "Both if you've got 'em," I chuckled. Sometimes laughter is the only way to keep the pain at bay. By noon, I was sitting in Eddie's kitchen, the familiar smell of burnt toast and motor oil mixing in the air. We talked for a long time. I told him everything, how Brian had stormed in, thrown my life in my face, acted like I'd wasted all my years just because I didn't end up on the cover of Forbes. Eddie leaned back, folding his arms over his chest. "Howard, I've known you since we were both young and dumb. You worked harder than anyone I know. You put your family first. Any man who says that's nothing ain't looking close enough." He sipped his coffee and narrowed his eyes. "Brian's just lost, buddy. Chasing the kind of success you see on TV, big cars, big houses, more money than sense. He'll wake up sooner or later and realize that the things you taught him matter more than any title." Maybe Eddie was right. But as I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was broken between Brian and me, something I wasn't sure how to fix. The week crawled by. Each day followed the same routine: morning coffee, a slow walk around the block, a trip to the hardware store just to chat with old friends. Sometimes I'd pass Brian's billboard downtown, his smiling face advertising his startup's newest product. "Be bold. Be brilliant," it read. But at home, the only thing I felt was empty. Then came Sunday, the day that would change everything. I was reading the paper when the phone rang. Brian's number flashed on the screen. For a second, I almost let it go to voicemail. But something in me, a stubborn streak I'd carried since childhood, made me answer. "Dad, can we meet for lunch?" Brian's voice sounded different. Tired. Humbled, maybe. "Sure, son. Where?" He named a restaurant near downtown, a fancy place I'd only seen from the outside. I put on my best shirt, combed my hair, and drove across the city, nerves tight as guitar strings. Brian was already there when I arrived, tapping his phone, not really seeing the world around him. When he looked up, I caught a flicker of the boy he'd once been. We ordered. The waitress poured water. And for a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, Brian set his phone aside and looked me in the eye. "Dad, I'm sorry about the other day. I said things I shouldn't have. Truth is, things haven't been going well for me. Business is, well, it's tougher than I let on. That was the crack in his armor I'd been waiting for. I leaned in, my old instincts kicking in. You know you can always talk to me, Brian. Doesn't matter if you're a millionaire or flat broke, you're still my son. He nodded, but there was something else in his eyes. Worry, maybe shame. I've made mistakes, Dad. Spent too much, chased the wrong things. I thought if I just worked hard enough, got big enough, none of it would matter. It always matters, son. Not the money, but what you do with your life. Who you become. He looked away, jaw tight. I wish I'd understood that sooner. The food arrived, but neither of us ate much. We talked, really talked, for the first time in years. He told me about the pressure, the debts, the late nights worrying he'd let everyone down. I told him about Linda's last days, how her only wish was for us to stay close. By the end of the meal, something had shifted between us. The hurt was still there, but so was hope. For the first time in a long while, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back. I stood to leave, and Brian did too. He hugged me, quick and awkward but real. Thanks for coming, Dad. Anytime, son, I replied, meaning it more than he knew. As I walked out into the afternoon sun, I realized that family, real family, wasn't built on money or trophies or fancy cars. It was built on second chances, on forgiveness, and on the stubborn, unbreakable bond between a father and his child. After that lunch, things didn't turn perfect overnight, but a sort of uneasy peace settled between Brian and me. He called a little more often. Sometimes we talked about business, other times we just talked about the weather, or the Colts, or how the tomatoes were doing out in my backyard garden. Yet I could tell something was still eating at him. The kind of worry that doesn't let you sleep easy. I tried not to push. A man has to come to his own truth in his own time. A few weeks passed, and then one day, Brian called with a surprise. Dad, you ever been to a big football game at Lucas Oil Stadium? I laughed. Only on TV, son. The last time I saw a live game was back in the old RCA Dome, before they tore it down. Your mom and I took you once, remember? You were just a little guy, waving your foam finger. He chuckled, nostalgia creeping into his voice. I remember. Well, I got 2 tickets for the Colts game this Sunday. Front row seats. I want you to come with me. The offer caught me off guard. We hadn't done something like that in decades. Part of me wanted to ask if he could really afford those seats, but another part, the father part, knew not to ruin the moment. Sunday came, blue and gold everywhere in the city. Brian picked me up in his fancy car, the leather seats smooth as butter, dashboard glowing with all kinds of tech I barely understood. He seemed nervous, tapping the steering wheel as we drove. Inside the stadium, the noise hit us like a wall, fans shouting, music blaring, the electric buzz of thousands of people all focused on the field. Our seats were so close you could see the players' breath in the autumn air. For a while, we just soaked it all in. Brian bought us 2 beers and a couple of hot dogs, just like old times. The first quarter was exciting, the Colts scored early, and for a moment, it felt like we were just 2 regular fans, a father and son making memories. But then, during a TV timeout, Brian leaned over, lowering his voice. Dad, there's something I need to ask you. Something big. I knew what was coming. You get to my age, you can smell desperation from a mile away. Still, I let him talk. He hesitated, twisting his wedding band around his finger. My business, it's not just in trouble. It's in real danger. I need help, Dad. Financial help. There it was. I didn't answer right away. The crowd around us cheered as the defense forced a turnover, but all I could hear was my own heartbeat. How much are we talking about? I finally asked, steady as I could manage. Brian's voice was barely a whisper. 40,000. Maybe more. I know it's a lot, but. I held up a hand. Son, I wish I had that kind of money. But after paying for your education, the house, Linda's medical bills, all I've got is this place and my pension. His face fell. But you always seemed so steady, Dad. I figured you had something put away. I shook my head. That's not how it works for most folks. I saved what I could, but life gets expensive. All I have left is enough for my own needs, and a bit in case something happens. He stared at the field, jaw tight, fighting back frustration or maybe even shame. Sorry, Dad. I shouldn't have put you in that spot. It's all right, Brian. We all need help sometimes. But you'll find your way, son. You're smart, tougher than you know. He didn't answer, and for a while, we just watched the game in silence. It was a silence loaded with everything unspoken, my worry for him, his pride, our regrets and hopes all tangled up together. Then, right as halftime was about to start, Brian leaned back in his seat and sighed. I guess I just thought. I thought you always had it figured out, Dad. That you were the safety net. I looked him square in the eye. Son, the only thing I ever wanted was for you to be safe and happy. But sometimes, a father's job is to let his son learn how to stand on his own. That's what makes you a man. He nodded slowly, the lesson settling somewhere deep. At halftime, something happened that I'll never forget as long as I live. The Jumbotron flashed crowd shots, people waving, kids making faces, then, suddenly, the camera zoomed in on us. Me, the old man in a faded Colts cap, and Brian, my grown son. The announcer's voice boomed. Let's give it up for all the dads and sons here today, making memories. People clapped, and Brian actually grinned, embarrassed but a little proud too. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hope blooming in my chest. Maybe things weren't fixed yet, but we were still here, together. Maybe that was enough for now. The rest of that game blurred by in flashes, cheers, groans, the kind of nervous energy that lives in a stadium when the score is close. But my mind was miles away. Even as the Colts clinched the win in the final minute, I kept glancing at Brian, searching for some sign that he'd let my words sink in, or that our bridge, once broken, was at least halfway rebuilt. After the final whistle, we filed up with the crowd. Brian was quieter than usual, his eyes on the pavement, lost in thought. Outside the stadium, autumn sunlight glinted off his car, and the city seemed to pulse with possibility and regret. He broke the silence as we got to his lucid. Dad, I need to tell you something, and you're not gonna like it. He hesitated, looking at his hands on the steering wheel. I took out some loans for the company, more than I should have. Now they're coming due. If I don't find the money, I could lose everything. The business, the house, maybe even the car. The words landed heavy, like thunder in my chest. I thought about all those years I'd worried for him, when he first moved to the city, when Linda got sick, when the economy went south. I'd always hoped he was building something I could be proud of, something solid. Now, it all sounded so fragile. Brian, I said quietly, sometimes life knocks you flat. But you're not alone, son. I can't fix this for you, but I'll stand with you while you figure it out. He stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, eyes shining with that stubborn mix of shame and pride. Thanks, Dad. Means more than you know. The drive home was mostly quiet, but a better kind of quiet. The sort that comes after a storm, when you know the worst is past and the air smells like fresh beginnings. When he dropped me off, he squeezed my shoulder the way I used to do for him when he was little. I went inside and sat by the window, watching the evening settle on my neighborhood. Lights flicked on in other houses, families gathering for Sunday dinner, laughter drifting out on the breeze. I thought about Linda, her voice in my memory telling me to be patient, to love our boy even when he got lost. She always believed he'd find his way, in his own time. A few days later, I got a call from my old friend Eddie. You busy this week, Howie? There's a charity bowling tournament at the rec center. They need a couple old-timers for the Legends team. What do you say? I laughed, the first real laugh in weeks. Eddie, my knees are shot, my back's a mess, and my glory days are long gone, but what the heck, I'll come. The night of the tournament, I walked into that bowling alley and felt 20 years younger. The place was buzzing with energy, kids running around, families cheering, the sweet scent of rented shoes and popcorn in the air. Eddie waved me over, and soon we were knocking down pins, swapping stories, letting the noise and joy of the place fill the cracks in our hearts. In the final frame, Eddie nudged me and pointed to the door. Look who decided to show up. There was Brian, hands in his pockets, awkward but determined, like a kid at his first school dance. He watched from the sidelines as I lined up my shot, and I could feel his eyes on me, curious, maybe even a little impressed. My ball rolled down the lane and knocked over 8 pins, not bad for an old man with creaky knees. The crowd clapped, and Eddie grinned. Not too shabby, Howie. Brian came over after the game, lingering by the snack bar. Didn't know you still had it in you, Dad, he said, half smiling. Some things you never forget, I replied, handing him my old team towel. He held it for a moment, looking down at the faded lettering, Bennett Electric, 1987 champs. I remember you teaching me to bowl, he said, voice soft. I used to think you were the coolest guy in the world. I shrugged, trying to play it cool, but inside, I felt that old spark of pride. You were a quick learner, back in the day. Still are, if you let yourself. We sat on the bleachers, watching the rest of the games. For a while, we just listened to the crash of pins and the happy shouts of strangers. Brian cleared his throat. Dad, I'm trying to figure out what really matters now. Not just money or success, something more real. I've been chasing the wrong things. I nodded. Took me a while to learn that, too. Truth is, the most important things you'll ever build won't show up in your bank account. They'll show up right here. I tapped my chest. He was quiet a long time, then finally looked me in the eye. I want to be better, Dad. I want to do right by you. By Mom's memory. I smiled, feeling the years melt away. That's all a father can ask, son. Just keep showing up. That's what matters. As we left the alley together, I realized the past couldn't be fixed, but the future could still be built, one small, honest moment at a time. The weeks that followed were slow but steady. Brian didn't have a sudden windfall, and his business troubles didn't disappear overnight. But something had shifted between us. He came by the house more, sometimes just to share a sandwich, sometimes to sit in silence while a game played quietly on the TV. One rainy Saturday, I was fixing a leaky faucet in the kitchen when Brian walked in, shaking the water off his coat like a wet dog. Hey, Dad, you need a hand? It was the first time in years he'd offered without being asked. We worked side by side, just like we used to when he was a teenager and life felt simpler. After we got the faucet working, we sat at the table. I poured 2 mugs of coffee, and he finally let his guard down. Dad, I need to come clean about something. He stared at the steam rising from his cup, searching for words. A few months ago, I almost lost everything. The company, my condo, everything. I took out loans I couldn't cover, made deals I shouldn't have. I thought if I could just pull off one more win, I'd fix it all. But the truth is, I was scared. I listened, letting him get it all out. Every father wants to save his son from pain, but sometimes the only way forward is through honesty. I was too proud to ask for help until it was too late, he continued, his voice tight. And when you said no at the game, I felt like I'd failed at being your son, like I wasn't enough. I reached across the table, resting my hand on his. Brian, you've always been enough. Not because of what you earn, but because of who you are. Everybody stumbles. What matters is whether you get back up, and whether you're willing to let others help you stand. He looked at me, eyes shining with gratitude and something like relief. I just want to be better, Dad. For myself. For you. For Mom. We sat in silence for a moment, the rain tapping gently on the window. I thought about all the storms Linda and I had weathered, lost jobs, lost friends, sickness, setbacks. Through it all, what had mattered was sticking together, even when we didn't have the answers. The following Monday, Brian surprised me again. He called early, his voice more energetic than I'd heard in a long time. Dad, I signed up for a volunteer project with the local food bank. Figured I could use some humility and some fresh air. Want to join me? I agreed, maybe a little too quickly. The next weekend, we showed up at the old Methodist church on the east side of town. We spent hours sorting canned goods, packing boxes for families in need, and hauling crates out to cars. Brian worked hard, never complained, and even cracked a few jokes with the other volunteers. At lunch, he turned to me, sweat on his brow but a real smile on his face. This feels good, Dad. Feels real. I haven't felt this useful in years. I clapped him on the back. Sometimes the best medicine is just doing something for someone else. Later, while we took a break on the church steps, an old woman with silver hair and kind eyes came over. She thanked us for our help and pressed a homemade cookie into each of our hands. Brian grinned, crumbs on his lips. You know, Dad, I think I've been missing this kind of thing. Not the cookies, well, maybe the cookies, but the sense that what I do matters. We drove home with the windows down, spring air filling the car. Brian talked about ideas for getting his business back on track, honest ideas this time. Maybe smaller projects, maybe more community involvement. He wasn't chasing headlines anymore. He was looking for purpose. A few nights later, as I sat reading in Linda's old recliner, the phone rang. It was Brian. Dad, can I ask your advice about something? His voice was hesitant, but hopeful. Anytime, son. That's what I'm here for. He laid out his plan for a new business direction, simpler, more grounded, focused on helping local clients. No get-rich-quick schemes, no high-wire risks. He wanted my opinion, not as an investor, but as a man he respected. For the first time in years, I heard the voice of the boy who used to look up to me, not the man desperate for approval, but the son willing to build something good, even if it took longer. I told him the truth. Brian, the world needs more men who know what matters. I think you're finally on the right track. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, with a hint of pride in his voice, he said, Thanks, Dad. I just needed to hear it. As I hung up, I felt Linda's presence in the room, her warmth, her faith in our family, her belief that love and patience could mend almost anything. Maybe she was right. Maybe this was what all our years of sacrifice had been for, not the perfect life, but the courage to start over when we needed to. As spring melted into summer, I watched Brian transform, little by little. He sold his flashy car, traded it in for a used Honda. The condo went next, replaced by a modest apartment closer to his new office. He started biking to work some days, saying the morning air helped clear his head. The changes didn't happen overnight. There were setbacks, nights he'd call sounding defeated, days I'd find him sitting on my porch steps with his head in his hands. But now, instead of running away from problems, he talked them out. Sometimes, we'd sit for hours, just the two of us, with the cicadas buzzing and the porch light flickering above our heads. One sticky July afternoon, Brian showed up carrying a battered cardboard box. Dad, he said, a little sheepish, I cleaned out my storage. Thought you might want to look through these with me. Inside were old family photos, yearbooks, report cards, even a couple of faded Little League trophies. We spread everything out on the living room floor, laughing at ridiculous hairstyles and reminiscing about days long gone. Brian picked up a photo of Linda in her garden, holding a tomato as big as a softball, her hair tied up in a bandana. She was the heart of this family, wasn't she? he said softly. I nodded, my own eyes blurring a bit. Your mom never gave up on us. Even when things got tough. Brian leaned back, gazing up at the ceiling. I think I finally get it, Dad. Why you always held on to this house, these memories. It isn't just about stuff, it's about what we built together. What she built. For a long while, we just sat quietly, letting memories settle in like dust motes in the late afternoon sun. Later that week, Brian invited me to a small business mixer at a local community center. I want people to meet my dad, he told me. The guy who taught me about hard work and honesty. It wasn't a big event, just a handful of local business owners, a tray of grocery store cookies, a big urn of lukewarm coffee. But Brian introduced me to everyone, and for the first time, I could see he wasn't performing. He was genuine, eager to make real connections instead of just chasing profit. One of the folks there, a woman named Carla, pulled me aside. Your son's a good man, Mr. Bennett. He's been helping us get our nonprofit's website running for free. Says it's about time he gave something back. I couldn't help but smile. That was the Brian I'd been hoping to see return. One evening, Brian called with another kind of news. Dad, there's a football game next week. Charity exhibition, nothing big. Would you come? It would mean a lot if you were in the stands. I agreed, of course. Game day arrived with clear skies and a crowd full of families and friends. Brian wasn't playing. He was helping organize, making sure the volunteers had what they needed, passing out water bottles, setting up cones for the kids' halftime races. I watched from the bleachers, pride swelling in my chest. He didn't need to be the star. He was just glad to be part of something good. At halftime, the announcer called my name over the loudspeaker. Let's hear it for Howard Bennett, Brian's father and a man who's supported our community for decades. To my shock, the crowd applauded, and Brian gave me a thumbs up from the field, a smile as real as any I'd seen in years. After the game, he found me by the concession stand. You know, Dad, when I was a kid, I thought being a man meant having the best job, the biggest house, the fastest car. Turns out, it's about showing up for people. Sticking around even when things get messy. I pulled him in for a hug. That's the only kind of man worth being, son. We walked to the car together, the night warm and buzzing with energy. Brian looked at me and said, I wish Mom could see us now. I squeezed his shoulder. I think she does, Brian. I think she always has. That night back home, I sat on the porch under a sky full of stars, feeling lighter than I had in years. For all our mistakes, all our stubbornness and pain, we'd made it here, together, bruised but stronger. Family isn't about perfection. It's about loving each other enough to keep trying, no matter how many times you fall. Summer thunder rolled in the distance, a reminder that storms will always come, but this time, I knew we'd face them side by side. Life has a way of coming full circle, even when you least expect it. That summer ended quietly, the way Midwestern summers do, long evenings on the porch, fireflies in the yard, the comforting drone of crickets, and the soft, golden light that turns ordinary houses into something almost holy. Brian and I settled into a new routine. He still had his struggles, and I still had mine. But the days of pride and bitterness were behind us, replaced by honest conversations and small, important gestures. He'd drop by for dinner with a pie from the bakery, or we'd meet for lunch at the local diner, just two men trying to be a family again. One afternoon in late August, we were sitting on the porch, sharing a pitcher of iced tea, when Brian asked, Dad, do you ever regret any of it? The sacrifices? The choices you made? I took a slow breath. Watching a pair of blue jays chasing each other through the maples. Of course I do, son. Everyone's got regrets. But I wouldn't trade the life I lived, not for anything. If I had chased a bigger dream, if I'd taken more risks or built a business empire, maybe you'd have grown up different. Maybe you'd have had more, or maybe just less of the things that mattered. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. I used to think you settled, Dad. That you gave up on something bigger. But now I see, there's nothing small about giving everything to your family. I wish I'd learned that sooner. I reached over and squeezed his arm, the old bones in my hand reminding me just how quickly time slips away. It's never too late, Brian. That's the secret nobody tells you. Every day, you get another chance to be the kind of man you want to be. He smiled, and for a moment I saw not just my son, but the whole arc of our lives. Linda's laughter in the kitchen, birthday candles on a cake, the long afternoons teaching him to ride a bike. The world wants you to believe only big things matter. But it's the little things, the quiet loyalty, the honest work, the forgiveness after a fight, that last. A few weeks later, Brian had a breakthrough with his new business. Nothing flashy, just a solid project for a local client, a food co-op that wanted a simple website. He worked hard, finished on time, and got paid what he was worth. When he showed me the first check, his pride was quieter, deeper, more real. You did this, son, I told him. No shortcuts, no favors. Just you and your hard work. He grinned, shaking his head. Took me long enough to learn, huh? I laughed. Some of us are stubborn. Runs in the family. That fall, the town hosted its annual harvest festival. Brian insisted we go together, just like we used to when he was a kid. We ate corn dogs, played the ring toss, and watched the fireworks light up the night sky. Standing there, shoulder to shoulder, I realized how lucky I was, how lucky we both were, to have made it through the storms and found each other again. As the crowd cheered and the last sparks faded into the stars, Brian turned to me and said, "Thanks for never giving up on me, Dad." I felt a lump rise in my throat. I couldn't if I tried, son. You're my boy. That's forever. We walked home through the quiet streets, our shadows long and familiar on the sidewalk. In that moment, I understood what Linda always knew: family isn't just something you're born into. It's something you fight for, forgive for, and show up for, again and again, no matter how hard it gets. Now, when I sit in my chair by the window and look out at the world, I don't see a life of small achievements or quiet years. I see a lifetime of love, mistakes, hope, and second chances. I see a son who finally learned to stand on his own, and a father who finally learned to let go and trust the man he'd raised. If you ask me what matters in the end, I'll tell you it's not the trophies or the money or the stories that make the newspapers. It's the days spent together, the forgiveness given, the love that grows even in rocky soil. That's the legacy I want to leave, and the lesson I hope Brian carries long after I'm gone. And maybe, just maybe, one day he'll sit with his own child and tell this same story, reminding them, as I remind you now, that a good life isn't measured by what you have, but by who you become, and by the family who walks with you along the way.